Our promise for this week comes from Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. It says, "Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me." And so this was written to a church that thought it was doing okay, but God said that you are neither refreshing to your community or prophetic in your community. In fact, you have bought into the lies of your city. You think you're great, but you aren't. But he makes this promise that he is right there, ready to reach them, ready to speak with them, ready to dwell in their midst again and do mighty things in that church's life. He is standing at the door knocking and just waiting for someone to come in. And our passage today is about a moment where God shows up in Abraham's life. And this is one of those few moments in our series where our main human actor does the right thing and is a good example to show. So this is something to celebrate. Hey, Abraham did something right for once. And he shows us what it looks like to welcome the stranger in, and more importantly, to welcome God in, and what incredible things can happen when we welcome God in. So let's read from Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 through 15. "The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, 'If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may wash all your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat so you can be refreshed, and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant.' 'Very well,' they answered. 'Do as you say.' So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. 'Quick,' he said, 'get 3 seahs of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread.' Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice, tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them while they ate. He stood near them under a tree. 'Where is your wife, Sarah?' they asked him. 'There, in the tent,' he said. Then one of them said, 'I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son.' Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind them. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, 'After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have the pleasure?' Then the Lord said to Abraham, 'Why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I'm old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son.' Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, 'I did not laugh.' They said, 'Yes, you did laugh.'" So when strangers show up, we're to show hospitality. You see that Abraham looked up and saw the men standing nearby, and when he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He then does this long speech. So he hurries, and then he slows down to give this long, over-the-top welcome. "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, that you may wash your feet and rest under the tree. Let me get you something to eat so that you can be refreshed and go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." Very well. Notice he kind of understates what he's about to do. Just a little water and just a little food. You won't really be putting me out. But then he rushes again And he says very quickly, in just a few words, quick, he said, get 3 seahs of the finest flour and knead them and bake some bread, which 3 seahs is way more than enough for like 25, 30 people. Like that would feed like a good party, not just, 3 guys showing up. So like he wants this to be over the top. Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice, tender calf. Some of you guys, I know Bruce, you bought a calf to get food from. That's like freezers worth of meat, right? Yeah, like you had to get an extra freezer, right? For that meat, right? And so he's like, yeah, that's good enough for 3 guys to eat on a meal. I don't know how hungry he thought these guys were, but I think it's really just to show how over the top he's going, to show hospitality. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. While he ate, he stood near them under a tree. And so Abraham is this incredible example of a lost skill in our world, a lost virtue of hospitality. I know that I have completely lost that skill. I do not have hospitality in my gift repertoire at all. In fact, even some of the things that you would think about to be hospitable is kind of anathema to me. We were actually talking about this before Sunday school, how I'm not exactly that good with a lot of the skills necessary to show hospitality. Like, I have no idea who my neighbors are. Not a clue. I think I met one time and he was like, hey, just so you know, I'm your neighbor. And I was like, okay, cool. I guess I'll see you around, like I try to imagine myself like baking cookies and bringing it to people, and I'm just like, I don't know, that's weird. I just have this like internal hostile reaction to hospitality. And I think a lot of people my age have that same kind of loss, that same lack of ability to be hospitable. It seems to be pretty gone from our culture. And what happened? How did we get there? What happened? I mean, cell phones is part of it. For sure, cell phones is part of it. But I think 2 kind of things that really kind of drove it is, 1, we created hospitality industries, right? And 2, we had that stranger danger panic. And I grew up hearing stranger danger all the time. And so if you think about the first one, why did people across godly and ungodly cultures at Abraham's time and through a lot of history, why was it so important to show hospitality? Even the most ungodly cultures taught hospitality and showed hospitality. Why did they do that? Well, because you had to walk places, right? Which means traveling was so much more difficult. You traveled either for a religious reason or for a need-based reason. You didn't just travel for fun. Some of the big places might have an inn or might have some tourist stuff, but you have to go pretty far between big cities. There are a lot less people, so a lot less big cities, right? And when you're walking, if you've ever been camping, or backpacking, the more stuff you bring, the harder the journey is, right? And so that meant that if anybody who traveled would have to rely on strangers for the basic needs to get to where they're going. And of course, traveling became easier. And more people traveled not because they needed to or for a religious reason, but just for fun. And that meant it was more profitable for industries to come up to treat travelers. And so now we live in a world where you see a traveler and they don't really need the hospitality of strangers. What they want most of the time is to pay for people to treat them better than they get treated at home, right? They want they pay for what they want instead of ask for what they need. And so becomes this divorce, and we've needed hospitality less, and it's become less important. And I think one of the drawbacks of that is it took away one of the avenues to help people. And it leaves pretty much just charity or protesting. And charity is amazing. It's a good thing. Protesting is not so amazing. It's not such a good thing. But charity is this great thing, right? But you can do it at a distance from people. You can just give someone food and not talk to them, not know them at all. You can just write a check and not experience what people are experiencing. Charity is something where you can be divorced from people and not know what they're struggling in and not be there for them. And the thing about poverty is it's more a radical loss of community than it is a radical loss of resources. And charity only addresses the radical loss of resources. Hospitality helps us address the radical loss of community. So we need to learn how to develop and reinstitute and rebring us back to not just being charitable organizations, but places of hospitality. And then the second thing is the stranger danger moral panic of the early 80s. I was born in 90, which means I'm kind of at the tail end of that panic. So I heard all the stranger danger, and here are the 10 ways to keep yourself and keep your kids from experiencing stranger danger, and don't go, if anyone gives you candy, don't follow them, beware of people in vans, beware of vans, was something like I taught, and I didn't really get to experience the beginning. And so as I was researching this, I was just kind of blown away about all of it, right? And so I'm going to try. I really went down the rabbit hole preparing this. That's why I was working on my sermon up till Saturday, which I normally don't do because I had spent so much time on this rabbit hole. So I'll really try not to take this sermon down that rabbit hole that I went on, but just kind of hit the tail end. So 1979, Eric Panitz was kidnapped in New York City. His mom, for the very first time, allowed her son to walk to the school bus, and she had arranged with a friend 2 blocks away to make sure that, kind of an eye on the kid as they were going, but the kid didn't even make the 2 blocks towards the friend, and he disappeared. Nobody knows where he went. And so that news story really broke into our culture. It really started this story of these dangerous strangers, and do you know where your kid is at night? His dad was a professional photographer, and so there's just all these beautiful pictures of this kid that were able to be shared. And that was kind of the first. And then there were some more stories. The Walsh kid, the Walsh boy, Brian Walsh, who was taken in the mall when the mom went away for 10 minutes. And these stories got shared over and over again. And it ignited a really, really big fear. And all the parents were terrified that their children would be the same story. And in 1982, CBS ran this evening report, and they said 50,000 kids went missing that year. And the reality was, yes, 50,000 kids went missing that year, but that included all the ways that kids go missing. And when you broke it down, like this chart there, the ones that fit that story of a stranger kidnapping you and stranger danger was less than 1%. Most were runaways or throwaways. 12% was a family member took, like a custody dispute. A couple of percent was lost, and less than 1%, less than 50 kids total that year were actually kidnapped. And about half of them were found. And so, 25 kids who were kidnapped and murdered is definitely sad. It's definitely tragic. But it wasn't worth the moral panic. It didn't fit the world. It wasn't true to the world. There wasn't a rise in kids being kidnapped. There wasn't a rise in this danger. It was still a pretty rare, tragic, but rare event. And in the church, there was another moral panic that was happening the exact same time. It was the satanic moral panic. And that started with a book called, I think, Melissa's Memories. And you might know that better. But it was a hack psychiatrist saying that he recovered memories that this girl had repressed about being kidnapped and thrown into a satanic cult. And then there was another famous guy who'd go around and talk about, said he was a leader of a satanic cult before converting to evangelical Christianity, except 20 years later there was a huge report on him, and it turns out that he was never in a satanic cult, and he was making all that stuff up, become famous. And so in churches, the panic over stranger danger was increased, because it wasn't just strangers, it was satanic people trying to get your kids into this rituals, the satanic rituals, and they were using these kids that they kidnapped for all these satanic rituals and all these horrible things. And the fear and the panic just grew and grew, and everyone was worried about strangers when less than 1%, it was about 25 kids a year that were actually part of this danger. And then this became very useful. It became very useful to people who wanted tougher laws against criminals. And there was a string of new laws in state and federal laws that expanded sentencing and imprisonment for all sorts of crimes named after the couple stories, the couple kids who were kidnapped. And so this became this rallying cry, this expression and explosion of fear became the push and the reason to imprison more and more people, to entrap more and more people. And all these laws were given names after kids who had been taken. They used the worst fears to inspire the worst cruelty. And so, in 1972, the imprisonment rate was 93 people per 100,000 people. The prison expansion that commenced in 1973 reached its peak in 2009, achieving a 7-fold increase over the intervening years. Between 1985 and 1995 alone, the total prison population grew an average of 8% annually. And between 1990 and 1995, all states, with the exception of Maine, substantially increased their prison populations from 13% in South Carolina to as high as 130% in Texas. The federal system grew 53% larger during this time period alone. What does that look like? Well, that graph right there, where it was low, it gets out to about 1970s, 1980s, 1975, 1980s, and then you see this huge increase. And it wasn't correlated to an increase of crime, it was correlated to an increase in crime laws. And so that leaves us to where we are today, where only El Salvador, Cuba, Rwanda, and Turkmenistan imprison people at a greater rate than we do in the United States. And that's people per 100,000. That says we are at 541 people per 100,000 in our prison system. All right, so what do we learn from all that? Hopefully you didn't think it was too much of a rabbit hole. But first, I think hospitality is the solution to fear. It is the exact opposite position of fear. Why am I not hospitable? Because I fear, right? Hospitality is that open arms. Fear is that closing up. And so the first thing is, when you hear stories that make you afraid, be 10 times more suspicious about that story. Learn to ask not only is that story true, but is it representative? Is this one example of a lot of examples, or is it the rare occurrence? And if it confirms your biases, it confirms what you always believe, be twice as suspicious. Because there's nothing like fear to bring out the cruelty in us. I am most cruel when I'm afraid. I am least faithful and trusting and loving when I'm afraid. So learn to resist the narratives of fear. And then second, you should learn that your pastor has this really, really big flaw. I have a really, really big blind spot in my life of hospitality. And I know that a lot of you have the gift of hospitality because you've shown hospitality to me by inviting me into your home and doing that. And so I ask that you would use your gifts of hospitality, not just to treat me and show love to me, although still do that. I still want your food. But also use that to encourage me and spur me to better love and good deeds. If you guys can help me know my neighbors better, I would be incredibly grateful to you. And 3, if you have the gift of hospitality and you are using that gift often, try just expanding your list a little bit more. Like if you are already inviting some people over, look down to some of those distant acquaintances or the neighbor that hasn't dropped by yet and try inviting them. Try expanding out your hospitality a little bit more whenever you get a chance. Invite a few people that you normally wouldn't invite. Be gracious, that kind of thing. And then 4th, the last thing that I was able to come up with, and of course this list is imperfect because I'm really bad at it, but if you can, think about your charity and see if you can add a bit of hospitality to it. So I know many, many of you are so good at when you see somebody on the side of the road needing food, going and getting them food and feeding them. That is great charity. Maybe try to add sitting with them and eating lunch with them. Sitting on the side of the road and talking with them and eating lunch with them at the same time. Not just giving food, but spending time. If you go to a shelter and you are in like food, soup kitchen, and you give out take some time to go sit with them after you've given out the food. One of the things I love about Reset that I volunteer at on Tuesdays from 10 to 1 is that those in need show up several weeks in a row. And we help them with their documents like the first week, but then the next week they're just kind of there because it's a place to be, right? And and we get people coming back, and you get to have that opportunity to talk with them and get to know them a little bit. So try to find ways to add a little bit of hospitality to your charity. And then fifth, if you have the gift of hospitality, share a list with me, and I'll maybe find some time later to share that list a little bit more. But let's try as a church to grow together in being a place of hospitality. And then the second thing is when strangers show up, expect the impossible. Where's your wife Sarah? They asked him. There in the tent, he said. Then one of them said to them, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I would love to know when Abraham figured out who his strangers were. When did he realize that he wasn't just talking to normal people, he was talking to the Lord and two angels? In Hebrews, it tells us to show hospitality because you never know. You might be entertaining angels unaware, right? And God showed up again in Abraham's life, and he made specific a promise that he's been making for a while. He had been promising that Sarah would have a son, and it was always sometime. And this is like 25 years after the first start of the promise, right? When he first said go, Abraham received that covenant of circumcision like a good year before this, right? Like there is this time, and finally the Lord says, this is now. This is going to happen. And Sarah couldn't believe it, right? And the Lord said, is anything too hard for the Lord? And here is the great news for all of us, is that when the Lord shows up in your life, impossible things happen. When the Lord showed up in your life, you were dead in trespasses and sins. Gone, a goner. I don't know about you, but dead people don't wake themselves up. That's an impossibility. And yet God raised you from being dead in your sin. When you were dead, when you met the Lord, you needed to be completely reborn. That's impossible. Nobody gets reborn. They can't go back into your mother's womb. No, that's what Nicodemus was struggling with. And yet God showed up. You became a new person, created in righteousness and goodness. God shows up in your life, and that sin that you found impossible to overcome, all of a sudden you're free from that addiction. All of a sudden that sin becomes easier. When God shows up in your life, that suffering that you think, I will never recover from this grief, I'll never recover from this pain. God shows up in your life, all of a sudden you have this peace that passes understanding. All of a sudden your heart and mine is guarded in Christ Jesus. When God shows up in your life, He's going to do impossible things. God has plans for you that are beyond what you can even think or imagine, because He is able to do things beyond what we can think or imagine. It is a good thing to be more welcoming of other people, be more welcoming of strangers. But the best thing is to welcome Jesus. When you hear Him knocking on the door of your heart, to welcome Him into your life. Because when Jesus shows up into your life, He brings the impossible. So if you haven't done that yet, or if maybe you did it in your past and you thought, man, I need an impossible right now. I need a new impossible. Now's the time to say, Jesus, let me be a place where You dwell. Come, fill my life, and do the impossible with me. Let's pray that prayer. Dear Jesus, thank You that You are willing to come into our lives, and that You are capable of doing things that we cannot even think or imagine. Lord, thank You that when You rescued us from sin, You did the impossible by bringing us to life, by helping us become new people. We ask that You would help us as a church be a place that is welcoming to You and the impossible things that You are planning to do in our midst. We pray this all in Your name. Amen.